Women in Guyana continue to face intersecting challenges, including gender-based violence, economic insecurity, and limited access to consistent mental health and social support services. In response to these realities, grassroots organizations like Tamùkke Feminists have become key spaces for both advocacy and direct support. Founded by Akola Thompson, Tamukke has worked to bring issues such as women's rights, reproductive health, and mental well-being into public discussion while also supporting women on the ground. This week on Sources, we speak with Akola Thompson about her work, the mission of Tamùkke Feminists, and the wider challenges facing women across Guyana. Good evening and welcome to Sources. I'm your host, Svetlana Marshall. Tonight, we'll be focusing on women. And in studio, we have a very powerful young woman, no other than Akola Thompson. Now, she is the founder of Tamùkke Feminists. Did I get it right?
Yes, you did.
Lovely, lovely. Akola, how are you?
I'm okay. It's great to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Now, you are widely recognized. Like I said, you're the founder of Tamukke, and you've been pushing conversations on gender-based violence, mental health, and women's rights in Guyana. Now, for persons who may not be familiar, in fact, you're a writer. I know you from your columns in Stabrook News. Tell us a little about yourself.
Oh man, where do I start? Yeah, I've been in the gender and development space for about 11, 12 years now. And I've really tried to do a lot of public writing to push forward intersectional analyses over the years because I feel like those conversations are really lacking in Guyana. I'm actually currently doing my PhD in gender and environmental studies, and it's just like a continuation of my work within academia, civil society, Tamukke, and I'm just really looking forward to see how I'm able to expand and grow all of that over the years.
Mm-hmm. Now, what caused you or who inspired you to launch or form Tamukke?
Well, to be honest, it was a bit of a hobby for me when I first started it in 2017 because I was a part of all these civil society organizations, whether it was those focusing on women's rights, LGBT rights, economic rights, but no one was really having intersecting conversations with each other. And I felt as if I was learning quite a lot, more than my peers, and I wanted to be able to share that. And so I really started having Facebook Live conversations. And people loved it. A lot of folks came on board. Marvel Langevine and Amy Young were two of the first persons that came on board to help me really grow that. And I'm really grateful for the support I got from them and everyone else over the years. But it really was the drive and focus for me to be able to expand public intellectual knowledge within Guyana because there was a sore lack in the place. It's much, much better now, and I'm happy for that, and we're able to really continue our work in that area also.
Why the indigenous name?
Well, there's several reasons. One, I am Black and Indigenous, and so I do want to ensure there's honors to my identity, but also when it comes to having Indigenous peoples as first peoples within Guyana, I think it's great to pay homage to that. And then Tamukke is in Patamona words, it means community. We wanted something that was really distinctive to us, and so we did a whole outreach to some Indigenous translators to really find a name that was suitable for us.
You really put a lot of thought
yes.
into it. Now, you spoke about intersectoral issues and platform, but they weren't really talking to each other. Now, what were the specific failures that you saw or gaps within the system that you thought really needed to be addressed when it comes to women?
I think one of the biggest gaps for me was a lack of LGBT intersections in women's advocacy. And I think it's just like a blind spot, especially for those who might be older within the movement. There's a lot of stigma and conflict around it, of course. And I wanted to ensure that persons like myself, others within the community, were able to see themselves within all of these spaces that we exist in. And so that really was one of the larger ones for me. But in addition to that, it's also recognizing that none of us live single issue lives. I mean, you're a Black woman, you're an Indigenous woman, you face issues of poverty, abuse, economic violence. Like, these are things that affects a broad spectrum of women. And the realities is that no one is really able to, I guess, achieve everything they can if they don't have all of their needs fulfilled and met. And so it was really about connecting these conversations together to ensure that we don't have blind spots and things aren't necessarily being addressed. And I think even in our politics, things tend to be very single issue, but the reality is just that we need to be more expansive. We need to ensure that our analyses are really touching everyone and their lives and the issues that are affecting them.
Now, how were you able to incorporate that aspect into the conversations that you started? You said it really started as an experiment in social media and conversations that you've had. And how has Tamukke blossomed into what it is today since 2017?
Oh, there's been so many shifts since then. I think that everyone that has come and been a part of Tamukke has contributed something unique, and it has really helped us to build in a much stronger way, much quickly than a lot of organizations. And that really is the driving focus for us to ensure that communities, the ones that we serve, the ones that we work with, are really pushing our conversation forward. And I think because there was a lack of that space, a lot of people started reaching out to me. How can I be a part of this? And at the time, there was no structure. There was just me. There was just me. And so I had to learn very quickly, okay, what do I need to set up? What do I need to put in place so that this can be something that is sustainable beyond me? Because again, as a feminist organization, you want to think about leadership beyond yourself for the wider community and what that means. And of course, me being able to transition out of this role in the next year is something that I'm also aiming for.
So tell me a bit about, you spoke, and I want to dwell on it a bit. You said just now public education and the conversations that you've had, but I want to get to the specific issues that you were able to address through those conversations.
So some of the specific issues, because it's an intersectional analysis, there's not like one specific thing that we tend to focus on a lot, but I guess largely there's a sexual health and reproductive health angle. And so over the years, we've had conversations on LBT sexual health. We had a research in 2024. It was our first official research that focused on LBT experiences of sex education, their knowledge, what they've been doing in their homes and communities. And it provided a lot of insights for us and advocacy points where we were able to now integrate into our work and also look at the ways in which we can push forward, whether it's more research, more policy advocacy. And so those are some of the things that we've been trying to do more of, but also having a focus on mental health. So Guyana, of course, had a very negative reputation over the years, suicide capital of the world. And a lot of that really comes back to the impact of mental illnesses and not having support in that way. And we saw that, and we wanted to be able to support women survivors of violence in their healing journey. And I mean, this is nothing new for me. When I worked at a previous organization, I think people love to talk to me. And so a lot of folks would come and they would have conversations about what they're going through. But that can be very heavy for one person. So I really integrated a mental health program there. And so when I started Tamukke, I immediately started looking at ways in which we can support and fund women's access to therapy. And so that has been going on since 2020, we officially launched the program. And every year since then, we've been able to grow the numbers that we've been able to support. This year, we have over 80 women who've been
80.
80, yeah, who have been able to access therapy for this year for the first cycle. And that was a major accomplishment for us because we've also been able to see the feedback from them, folks who are really invested in their healing journey and are grateful for the opportunity to get that free service.
Mm-hmm. Were women receptive to this therapy, or the numbers gradually increase? And is this where you hope it would be at this point?
I will say that it was a bit of a learning experience for us in terms of just kind of getting people committed to the process and also growing the numbers, because again, there's a lot of stigma attached to mental health and accessing therapy. I mean, it's gotten much better in Guyana right now, but there's still that stigma. And so over the years, when we had different cycles, people might do 1 session, 2 sessions, and then not come back, or they sign up and not show up. And so internally also, we had to do a lot of system building, our own checks and processes to ensure that, you know, those who come on board are actually seeking that support. And it's really this year that we got a hang of it finally, and that's been reflected in the numbers that we've been able to see.
Now, were you taking this on private or personal level? Was it because there were gaps in the public service that you think that there was not enough services available for persons to access such things like therapy to address, you know, mental health and allow persons to express themselves in a free space?
Absolutely,
and a safe space?
Absolutely. I mean, I definitely needed therapy at different points in my life. And I would try to access that service, but unfortunately, therapy is expensive, especially if you're like a young student, you're a young mom. You don't have extra money to really go after therapeutic support. And of course, there is the Ministry of Health. The hospital also offers services. But again, it's not really as supportive as it can be. There's still a lot of gaps. I know they're doing tremendous work with the resources that they have, but I think as much as possible there needs to be more of these services, and not only in Georgetown, in regions outside of Georgetown, and that's even a bigger gap. And so with the services that we provide, and of course we work with different therapists, both within Guyana and outside of Guyana, it's to ensure that we are able to cover the regional basis, so to speak, and not have everything very centralized within Region 4.
That's good to hear. So you're in the other administrative regions. How do you manage? How do you how persons get in contact with the organization to enlist your service?
So we usually have a call. Usually we have 1 to 2 cycles per year. So when we're launching the cycle, we do a public call on our Facebook page or Instagram. That's Tamùkke Feminists. And we keep that open for about 2 to 3 weeks just to ensure we get enough participants. And of course, we keep persons on hand if we're not able to support everyone at once. And then we're able to really have a conversation with them about what their needs are, what are some of the support, so we can match them individually with therapists. And so that's kind of been what the process has been like. We do have therapists who offer both in-person and remote. So if they're unable to make it at one of their offices, because again, most of them are in Region 4 or out of the country, then they would be able to have that support.
And what's the name of this specific program that you offer the therapy?
That's the Mind Fund.
I thought so.
Yes.
And so do you think that conditions like poverty, violence, and dependency are contributing factors to the issues women face, particularly with mental health in this country?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I think that when people often talk about mental health, they think of it solely in terms of just like mental illness, right?
Yeah.
And that is definitely a significant part of it. But we don't really look at the systemic factors of mental health. And the reality is that a lot of persons are in the positions they're in because of poverty. When you have to think about where your next meal is coming from, how you're going to feed your children, those are strenuous mental health concerns. And it doesn't take a lot for people to really go into a depression or develop other disorders because of the circumstances they're in. And when we look at cases of abuse, Guyana's abuse rate ridiculously high. And so when we look at violence against women in particular, a lot of them are dealing with challenges that they don't have anyone to really support them. Maybe they're family or friends, but again, we have a culture of violence that is so normalized that you might go to someone for support and they might be like, girl, you know, that's just how things are. You got to see things through. And that just continues the cycle. And so ensuring that people have access to this service is important because it helps us to break some of those cycles in a way, because of course we're empowering the women themselves to become strong leaders in their homes and communities.
Now, so you're providing therapy on one hand and counseling, but how do you ensure that, for example, women who are victims of domestic violence, what support is offered to ensure that, you know, they leave that kind of environment and they're able to lead independent lives?
So a large focus of our work is public education. And so that has been a very intentional stance we've taken, because I do believe that when it comes to support responses and different structural mechanisms, that needs to come from the government, even addressing the gaps that are there. I think that civil society often fills a lot of these gaps, and that's really, really important. But it's also, the onus is also on the government to ensure that these services are accessible to persons across a wide spectrum. And so for us, when we're thinking about abuse, it's more focused on public education, ensuring that decision makers have relevant information, advocating on different policies and responses, because we're all shaped by a culture of violence, and the only way that we really move from that is to actually start having, well, we have been having the conversations, but integrating what we've been learning over the years and time again, because almost every time there's a gruesome murder or abuse case, there's some conversation on it, but it doesn't really go anywhere in terms of the responses, both from an individual, communal, and governmental level. And so it's really about all of us kind of working together, being able to play the parts that we can to ensure that ultimately this culture of violence becomes denormalized.
Have you, as an organization, been able to sit with government to share your thoughts and solutions as to how we could move a step forward in addressing this issue?
Not as yet. I mean, a lot of our work over the years has been very, how do I put this, very advocacy based in the sense of liaising with community members and putting that information out there. But we do believe there's importance in having those conversations with decision makers, of course. And so, for instance, with our feminist budgetary analysis, that is one place that we want to begin having those conversations, because, of course, all of these issues, a budget is where all of these issues can really start to be addressed, because budgets impact every facet of our lives.
Okay. Now, since we're on that topic, let's talk about that analysis that you did of the 2026 national budget. Why did the organization decide to, you know what, let's assess this budget, let's see where the gaps, the strengths, the weaknesses?
So I think over the years, Guyana has seen tremendous growth, and that has been great economically for a country in certain sections of the population. And it's reflected also in how expansive the budget is now. But I do believe that there has been a gap in terms of really assessing how the budget is really impacting specific populations, what the gaps remain to be filled, and that's really where we were coming from it. So we did have two consultants who worked on this, young economists, Jada Overton and Sequoia Peterson. And the work they did was very extensive. We also did an analysis comparing the 2026 budget to some of the previous years, just to show the trajectory. And across it, what we've seen is that while there's been major growth in infrastructural development, when it comes to actual human resources, services, especially moving outside of Region 4, it still remains kind of dismal. And we want to be able to see that expanded more. And again, when we're thinking about intersectional feminist analysis, that's not usually something that is done within the context of Guyana's budget analysis. And so we did see that gap. I do know that Red Thread has over the years had a version of this. And so it's kind of building on some of that work while putting in our own little spin to it. And some of the findings for us, especially around reproductive health and services, it's disappointing, to be very honest, because, as for example, when we look at the Abortion Act, which has been implemented since in the early 1990s, and today we just have maybe 3 or 4 public hospitals that offer this service, and most of them are in Region 4. There's one in Region 6, and I think now there's one in Latam. So there's much more that can be done, especially for those who are living in rural and indigenous communities who are not able to travel far distances, who do not have the economic support to be able to make long trips. And so what often happens still is that many women take matters into their own hands. And of course, this is not to discount like indigenous herbal remedies and so on that they might use in pursuit of getting rid of a pregnancy, because that's very important and that knowledge needs to be maintained. But it's also about, like, maybe for those who might not have that knowledge or who might not be as au fait with it, there are others also in rural communities who take matters into their own hands with really disastrous consequences, such as, and there's some cases that usually come back to me every time I talk about these issues. It's like one woman in Region 6, I believe, who injected gramazone into her stomach to get rid of a pregnancy, and then she died. And of course, there's people still having back alley abortions because of, one, the stigma, but also the access, whether that's lack of access to services close by, lack of access to economic support to actually go to a private institution or travel to one of the available centers. And so when we were really trying to look at the larger picture here, it shows a gap that needs to be filled. And in addition to that, it's also just looking at the climate aspects of it, because it was a health and environmental analysis. And so we wanted to show the connections that, hey, health and environment, they're not as separate as they're often made out to be. And I think this is an important conversation, especially now, given that Guyana is in a place wherein our extractive industries, particularly oil, gold mining has been with us in addition to other sectors, they're really, really expanding. And the relevant protections that are needed are not necessarily being implemented. And so that is a real risk, especially for women or marginalized communities, and we wanted to be able to highlight that.
Now, one could argue that while abortion is one aspect, and you rightfully address that, they could say, well, from government's perspective, that in addition to the existing hospitals that we know, there were the establishment of 6 new regional hospitals, and so it not only provide medical services to women, but all Guyanese. Isn't that sufficient? No?
I would say it's a good step, but definitely we do need infrastructure across the country. And so it is good that there's more hospitals being built, there's more professionals being able to man those. But when it comes to the actual services, especially reproductive health and care, that's really important. And abortion definitely is one facet of reproductive health, right? But it's ensuring that regardless of where women are, that they have access to those services. And of course, this is not something that primarily only affects women, because men also are affected by these decisions or lack of services, because there's different things, whether it's checking for like prostate cancer or different different issues that might be coming up. But also, men are very involved, or should be more involved, in the conversations on family health and sexual health and reproductive rights. And those are things that we can't really have as much as we need to unless we start having those things put into place. And I think it's an even more important conversation now, because Guyana has seen a rise in sexual health and transmitted diseases. Guyana has seen an increase in sexually transmitted diseases and illnesses over the years, especially amongst young people. And so it really begs the question as to what is really being done to ensure that young persons, especially who might not have been a part of, the whole public education campaign that we had over the years and that has dwindled down now, how are we really providing the support for them? And that comes back to one of the other gaps that we highlighted in our analysis, which I know has been a hot point for many advocacy organizations here also, which is the lack of a comprehensive sexuality education, ensuring that people, young children particularly, have age-appropriate sex information and access so that they're making the right decisions. Because the reality is that teenagers, young people, they're talking about sex, they're having sex, and it's really about ensuring that they have the tools and the resources to make responsible decisions.
Have you, what were the primary recommendations coming out of that report to government, and do you intend to lay that document over officially to the government to ensure that when they're crafting the next budget, that some of your recommendations are incorporated in that budget?
So yes, we have sent it to some select ministries, and we do have some responses already, just acknowledging, and so we do hope to follow up and have more conversations about implementing some of those recommendations. But amongst the recommendations is for the establishment of a gender responsive unit in the Ministry of Finance, because when we look at the budget, and of course, like, I understand you are dealing with an entire country, a very small population in terms of everything. And so you really want to touch all your bases, but there's a large gap when it comes to ensuring that women and other vulnerable communities are really represented in the budget and their needs are being prioritized. And so having that gender responsive unit within the Ministry of Finance would ensure that conversations aren't being left out, issues aren't being left out. I would recommend having persons from maybe different regions. Of course, we have the different representatives in the government also who can speak to those issues, but have more conversations to see where the gaps are so that they can be implemented, particularly for women, because there's not as much that needs to be there from a gender angle. And I think that has been one of the blind spots and why we were really keen on doing this analysis.
Now, let's talk about the conference. You're having a feminist conference, am I correct? Tell us about that. It's going to be held within weeks in August.
So we do have an upcoming conference in collaboration with the Institute of Gender Studies, University of Guyana, and this will be held on the 17th and 18th of August. And the theme is really gender, health, and environment, because again, we want to show those intersections between all of this. I remember when we were having our initial discussions around it and people were like, oh, you're putting all three of this together? Isn't that too much? No, it's, everything is really interconnected, and that's what we want to be able to show. We do have some amazing speakers lined up. Our featured speaker is Maya Trotz, who is a professor of civil engineering who will be here in Guyana, and Angelique Nixon, who's a Trinidadian scholar and has been working in this area for quite a while now. And we want to be able to demonstrate to persons what the impacts of environmental harm has on women, vulnerable communities, and their health. And so, for instance, like some of the panels that we'll be looking at we have some indigenous representatives who will also be there and will be speaking about the impacts of extraction in their own communities and what that looks like. And I'm really excited for those conversations because often when we're having them, they tend to be very separate. And so bringing them together within that space, I believe, can be very important. And of course, thinking about the next step from the conference, we want to be able to have a policy brief afterwards, just to, again, be able to have those conversations with decision makers, so that it's not just us talking amongst ourselves, and so that things can actually move forward, because these things need to be on the agenda at the high level, and it's important that they're paid attention to. And so we also wanted to be able to ensure that youth perspectives are represented, because as much as youths are very involved, their voices are not often elevated in that way. And so we want to ensure that we give them that opportunity to share how, whether it's the extractive-based activities like oil extraction or gold mining, how it's impacting them in their homes and communities, and what they want to see happen next.
So who gets to be a part of the conference, and how do they be a part of it?
So if you would like to be a panelist, I'm sorry, your luck is out, the time has passed. But if you would like to sign up and attend, we still do have open registration. You can check our social media pages at Tamùkke Feminists and sign up for the conference. And we, of course, would be happy to have persons participate. It is hybrid, so even if you can't make it in person, you can meet us online.
Now, we started off this conversation talking about the work that Tamukke has been doing over the years, and we referenced to the budget that it has analyzed, as well as the conference that is upcoming. Let's talk about the Work Ready program and what were the issues it intended. Of course, you're helping women get ready, or people in general get ready for work, but tell me more about that initiative and how successful it has been over the years.
So the Work Ready program, we are actually revamping it right now just to assess what were some of the weak areas, what we can strengthen moving forward. But the initial goal behind it was to ensure that those young persons now entering the job market had the relevant skills and resources that they need to enter the job force. And so we have had several sessions over the years focused on legal training. We had some lawyers represented who went through things like HR policies, your rights in the workplace, what to do if you're having issues with your boss, all of that. And especially within the context of like some of the new industries that we have, those were some of the things that they were able to cover. We've also had training sessions on how to create your CV, how to write a cover letter, how to research different companies, how to present yourself in an interview, because these are really important skills that you kind of learn through trial and error a lot of times. And so it's important for us to kind of give them that head start in that way. We also recognize the practical aspects of a lot of persons not necessarily having work-ready clothes. And so that was another component of the program. So we had outreaches in Region 6 and Region 4 primarily, wherein we had, it was kind of donation-based. People would donate their gently used clothing, and then we would redistribute this in the communities. I think especially in Region 6, this was very, very well received, and that was something that we wanted to be able to continue doing. But I think that when we're thinking about sustainability, a lot of our work, we're trying to ensure that it's not too service provision oriented, because again, we're thinking about capacity, ensuring that our team can adequately serve the populations that we're working with and meet the needs of those people. And so a lot of our work now is shifting in ways that we find can be more sustainable for longer term goals and achievement of them.
Okay. And was it just a clarity, was it just targeting women or both young men and women? Were you able to, and how did you get started with that? Because that is something that, like you said, we learn as we go. You know, you enter a job, then you figure out that, you know, there's a whole HR department and that these are some of the rules that you got to follow, and that this is the part of the contract that you didn't read. So it's an important thing. How did you get started with that?
So it was really just our team having internal discussions about what were some of the things that we wanted and needed when we were now starting out in our careers. Or like for me, I had to learn everything on my own, and so it just took a lot of years going through that process. And so we wanted to kind of speed that up a bit for folks now entering the job market. And yes, it was primarily just for women. So Tamukke deals primarily with women providing services. We do, if we have some events, of course, some of them men are invited to participate, but we do have some closed events to women only, because we want to create a safe and inclusive space, especially as we do have LBQ members who often face a lot of stigma, and ensuring that their needs are represented well within that. And I think also, as a feminist organization, I think also as a feminist organization, we made the political decision to not have men as involved or integrated within the space. Of course, over the years, we have utilized different consultants for different parts of our work and so on. But even our staff or membership, all women or gender non-conforming persons.
Okay, great. Now you have another project, the community part, and now you're issuing grants to persons to do small projects within their communities. Tell me more about that.
So this was actually one of the things I've been most excited about recently in Tamukke's transition. We had our first cycle of it last year, and so through the support of ARCA's Foundation for Justice, we had a LBQ amplification fund. And so what we did was provided community members with USD $1,500 each, and we supported about 6 communities. And all of them were able to implement their own projects. So we had things on menstrual health expo, we had abortion storytelling, we had sessions focused on, again, sexual health and reproductive rights. And so based on what we saw from that, one, we saw there was a clear need, because generally now the funding space is shrinking for civil society. And so we saw that need here to empower grassroots communities, because again, Tamukke has never been one that wants to just hoard everything for itself. As a community-driven organization, we want to ensure that as we rise, we bring people along with us and help to support their growth. And so once that was successfully completed and we realized, okay, we have the capacity for this, we're able to do more of it, we officially launched the Community Pot Fund through support of Black Feminists Fund. And this year we've also made, we've provided 5 additional grants to some members. We'll be able to put out a notice soon on those recipients, but I'm very excited to see how this develops and how the projects are implemented, because I think it's so important for community members to be able to have the creativity and the resources to really support the work that they're doing without like too much red tape, because that's also another thing with funding, wherein they're asking for an arm and a leg for everything. But we recognize that a lot of people also are working in these spaces with limited capacity, whether it's time, energy, and so we wanted to make the process pretty easy for them. And so folks just had to fill out a Google form telling us a bit about their project, telling us a bit about what they want to achieve with it. And then we were able to make our selections from that. But I'm really excited to see how that continues to grow.
So it's closed, the application process?
Yes, unfortunately, it's closed right now for the year. And so we'll have another one next year for those who might want to get on that.
And how long does the processing take? You say you have the 5 additional grants that you're going to issue. When are those grants expected to be issued?
This week.
Lovely. And what's the duration? Do they have like a specific period to execute it? And how do you measure impact? Yeah,
so because of the small amount, we're just off. We have 2 tiers. So there's the the micro tier and the larger tier. So the micro is 500 USD and the larger tier is 1500 USD. And so we wanted to be able to provide persons the opportunity to kind of experiment with some of their programs, whether they want to have like a small writing community session or they want to host an activity somewhere in Region 3. We want to be able to provide that. And when it comes in terms of impact, that's also something that we were very cautious about in terms of what we were looking for, because again, when it comes to funding organizations, you think of impact in very specific ways and metrics. But as a feminist organization, we often understand that impact is felt over time, and it's based on the growth from the community, the members, and how they're really able to integrate a lot of the skills or knowledge that is being shared in that space. And so, for instance, we do have some projects focused on like sexual health, especially given the rising rates of STIs, one on gender justice and rights in communities. And so those are some of the things. They're very different, but they're all rooted in the central tenet of gender justice.
Now, you spoke about this funding for this aspect, this particular project, the community part, but how have you been able to fund your entire organization over these years? And has it been, like you said, funding is shrinking? How are you coping?
Well, I will say that Tamukke has been a bit lucky in that department. So, I mean, I have been responsible for her grants writing over the years, and again, just thinking about like the trial and error process of learning what works, learning how to pitch your ideas to funders to ensure that you get the funding, but you also get funding that is aligned for you, because that's the other thing. You don't want to go after funding just because it's there. You want to ensure that it's aligned. And so I made the decision to go after feminist and flexible funders. And so most of these are international. Locally, we've started looking locally recently, but most of our funders are international feminist funders, and they provide flexible funding so that we can experiment and try to do different things and really amplify the work of local communities. And also, I think, given the shrinking funding space, like one of our funders were particularly happy about that, because they recognize the importance of really channeling funds to communities to ensure that they can implement their own solutions. I will say though that while Tamukke is in a strengthened position right now, like thinking about long-term sustainability, and I'm not sure what the space will look like in the next year or two, the reality is that with a lot of government changes, those will most likely continue. And so it's really about thinking, what do we look like beyond funding? What can we do to continue supporting our communities without being so heavily dependent on donor funding? And I know that's a conversation that many organizations have been having, that we've been in communication with. And so we've been also trying to learn about some of the things that we can implement here so that eventually we can move away and stand on our own feet.
And would you care to share, like, your plans? You said, you acknowledge that financial support from independent sources may not necessarily be there. It may, as it is right now, drying up. How is it that you're charting the way forward? You said you've analyzed some options.
Well, we're still in the assessment phase, so I don't want to speak too much on that. But we are exploring social entrepreneurship options in alignment with our feminist values to really ensure that we're able to kind of build that out. But I can't really speak to that right now.
That's okay. Now, when you look back, are you satisfied with what you've been able to do over these years? And where do you see yourself, maybe the organization, in the next 3 to 5 years?
I will.
Assessment, and then where do you see yourself?
I will be honest in saying that when I started Tamukke, I did not envision it growing into what it grew into. I'm grateful, of course, but again, it started as a hobby for me, just something for me to do in my own time. And then it kind of became very expansive, and that's been great. It's been definitely a journey. In terms of what comes next, I wouldn't be able to speak on what it's going to look like in 2-3 years from now, because I am transitioning out of my role in the new year. Again, just thinking about leadership transition, ensuring that new voices, new ideas can come in and really shape the direction of what Tamukke looks like, especially as we are aim to be run by young feminists. I mean, I'm 30, I'm still young, but transitioning out of that age bracket pretty quickly, I want to ensure that new persons can really come into that space. And of course, I think within Guyana too, when you're looking at organizations, you know, you have one founder and they're there for the rest of their lives. And I think that does a disservice because it really stifles creativity and, you know, trying new things and being experimentative. And I think given the genesis of Tamukke, some of the things that we stand for and want to see, really want to shift away from that as much as possible. And of course, I also have different things I would like to do.
You want to do. Now, you've worked, like you said, you've worked closely with women over these years, and you have a greater insight into the challenges. You spoke about the budget, but beyond the budget, what are some of the areas you see that are unreported, underrepresented, that government could make simple but important changes to better women's life in the country?
I think that I guess an expansion of the mental health programs that they offer, definitely having those wider in different regions and communities, that's an important function. But also, I think the approach to abuse, it needs to shift. And this is not to promote like a very carceral culture, as I don't believe in that. But there needs to be more of an accountability culture, I believe, because even from the government, there are persons who are not accountable, who are within those spaces. And it sends a very negative message to survivors of violence, those who are coming up, who see this as normal behavior. And I think those are some of the shifts that can be made. Additionally, ensuring that women and girls, men and boys have the relevant resources that they need to really strengthen themselves holistically. Because again, poverty is a big driver. And so ensuring that communities, rural, indigenous, urban, really have all the resources that they need, especially now that Guyana has, you know, some money. Really looking at how you can really strengthen and implement additional programs to really support more healthy communities.
When you say take accountability from governments, and explain what you mean by that.
I think over the years, and this is not one or two persons, over the years there have been many cases reported about government ministers and allegations of abuse being made against them, other peoples within the government. And those are never really addressed appropriately. Usually there's a bit of social media fanfare, and then the next 2 mornings you see that same person back taking photo ops. They're amongst children, they're amongst like different persons. And that sends a message that your words, your experiences do not matter. And I think that's really dangerous, especially as a government wherein you want to position yourself as someone who, as a government that is seeking to promote gender equality, that is seeking to promote safer communities. You really want to ensure that these things are adequately dealt with. And I think also implementing additional programs, wider community level, that is really able to meet people where they are. Because a lot of times we're really lacking some of the interventions and support that is required at the community level. There's a lot of NGOs and organizations that are filling that gap. And so again, trying to collaborate more with them, but also expand some of the additional services that are offered under the government ministries.
And I was going to ask about systems. Are you satisfied? You spoke about, those organizations, civil society organizations, community-based organizations that are filling the gaps. But what are the systemic issues that affect women, whether it's domestic violence, whether it's mental health issues that they're facing, whether it's poverty? What are some of the systemic issues that ought to be addressed, and what solutions you would put forward?
So systemic issues are systemic for a reason because they're so broad and encompassing, And the reality is that poverty, gender-based violence, those are among some of the high-level ones, I say, and there's so many that fall under it. And so really looking at how you're able to shift cultures. I'm a big believer in narrative change. Because when we think about implementation of laws and policies, that is very important. But you can have a change, but if there's not a cultural shift or mindset shift, not a lot is getting done. I'm thinking back to like the removal of the cross-dressing law over the last few years. But trans women are still being stigmatized daily. And so the reality is that a lot of it comes back to narrative shifts, and I do think that more efforts needs to be put into that because we're not getting where we need to be as yet.
Closing remarks.
I think that when it comes to community empowerment, it's really important for everyone to play their part. It's very easy to think about what this person is doing or what that person is doing, but the reality is that if there's no collaboration, if there's no co-learning, there's going to be very limited ways in which we move forward. And so really trying to ensure that there is an avenue for respectful and open collaboration, I think is so important for so many of the movements that we're working towards today.
Thank you so much, Akola, for joining us on this edition of Sources. All the best with the conference.
Thank you.
And I'll be looking out for those community party initiatives and all the work that you've been doing. The job readiness program that you have, and you reforming that. So congrats. And I know it's not easy, but you're doing great. So
thank you
congratulations.
so much.
And thanks again for joining us here on Sources. With that, we've come to the end of this edition of Sources. I've been your host, Svetlana Marshall. Do join us next week, same place, same time, for another edition.